Setting the stage for the Philippines' highly anticipated role as the guest of honor country at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2025, the Philippine Consulate General in Frankfurt hosted the book launching event for the Filipino graphic novella entitled Barcelona. Let us dive into the world of Barcelona and gain insights from the creative mind of the author herself, Ms. Criselda Yabes.
Everyone, I'm Criselda Yabes. I'm a journalist and a writer from the Philippines. I finished my studies at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, but I spent most of my childhood in the South, in Zamboanga City to be precise. First, I'd like to say that I come from the EDSA generation. So when I became a journalist, the country was in between dictatorship and democracy. And I saw what happened in EDSA. And that was, I thought, for me, it was the best time to be a journalist and somebody who was witnessing history as it was unfolding. And it was a very stressful period, but at the same time, I don't know if the right word is exhilarating, in the sense that I was discovering so many things about what it's like to be a journalist. And of course, at the end of a 7-year period, I was able to come up with a book. It was my first book about the coup attempts that happened during that period. And my first book was called The Boys from the Barracks. And for me, it was really a labor of love. And I told myself that this is what I want to do. I'd really like to be writing books. So that's basically how it started. In journalism, you go out and get the story. I mean, you really have to be there on the ground. You have to talk to people, and that's when you get what the story is. You do your gathering, your news gathering. You do your reporting, and then you sit afterwards and write the story based on the information you were able to gather. When I wanted to write more books or other books, other than what I would see in the field, it really became more of the story coming to me. Sometimes I would just sit and be quiet and see what story there really is on the ground. And that's when I decide, okay, this is probably worth writing a book about. So that's how I would classify both. In journalism, I would go out to get stories, but when it comes to writing books, fiction or even nonfiction, it's really more of the story coming to me. I think it's because when I started out as a journalist, I was thrown right into the middle of the action. So I had right away what every journalist, I believe, would crave for, which is an adrenaline high. For me, the challenge was getting the scoop. The scoop meaning that you have a story that other journalists don't have. So in those days, you don't tell your colleagues, you don't tell your peers where you're going and who you're talking to. Unlike today, where when they go somewhere, it's selfie and it's already on Facebook. You don't do that. We don't do that in those days because you're telling other people what you have and what you're doing. So to me, that was the most exciting part. That was the most challenging part, which is getting to the bottom of the story, because it's not when you go to a press conference or even when you interview people officially, you don't quite get the real story. There's always a story behind it. And for me, that's the most challenging part. And it was a man's world. So I was also immediately thrown into that. But it never occurred to me, oh no, I'm a girl, I can't do it. No, it's right there. You don't stop and say, oh, can I do this because I'm a woman or what? No, you just go, you just go straight into the reporting that's there for you to do. You just had no time to stop and think. And the only time you had to think was when you were talking with someone and trying to get the story out of them. But at that time, you just had to be there. That's where the action was. For me, I think I had the privilege to, after all those years, to be able to sit back and say, okay, what really went on? You know,
Yeah.
how do I assess this in terms of my country's history? How do I understand? How do I want to understand more about my country? What's really going on? What were the forces at play? What's important and what's not important? How do I weigh the information I had, and come up with something of an analysis or an accurate, at least a semi-accurate picture of what really was going on. And to me, that was a privilege. I think being a journalist during those days gave me that privilege that I don't think other journalists in this generation had. I wrote it when the pandemic started. I was just at home. I was telling myself, how could this be happening? I'm stuck in a city that I used to love and which I have come to hate. And why Manila? Because of that, I decided to see the old parts and went to the old part of Manila. I walked from the post office all the way to Fort Santiago, just to see that once upon a time we had this beautiful place. Because of that, I decided, okay, I would write a book. But what I had in mind initially was a graphic book, a novella, a comics. That's what I had in mind. It was short, but with a lot of description. But the publisher liked the text so much that she didn't want to disrupt it. So she kept the entire text and asked an artist to do drawings for it. So it's not quite a graphic novella as such, but it still falls under the category of graphic literature. What would happen if our country has been wiped away, or what would happen if Manila has been wiped away? How would I want it to start over again? Everything was in it. There's a bit of history, there's a bit of sentimental stuff. There's also a description of his architecture, and there's also a little bit of a love story, the issue of climate fiction, because the book is set in 2050 when Manila is sinking underwater. And I use this as a trope based on an article I had read in a magazine somewhere, or sa internet yata, that a big part of Manila was going to sink in 2050. So I wanted the readers to think, what's a disaster for us? We've been beset by so many disasters, both natural and man-made. We have like armed conflict in the south. We have the typhoons and everything, earthquakes. And, it seems like that's our tragic fate, diba? Like we're in the middle of the ring of fire. So this book is basically that. How would I want our country to change given the chance? Barcelona becomes a point of reference because she's more of, will she stay because she's so used to it? Or is she willing to go to the unknown, diba? Of a future? Again, this is going to be a little cliche, and I think other writers have said this too. I think it's basically trying to find your voice. But in terms of, as a journalist and in terms of doing a story, I think it's doing the story that makes a difference to you, that you would have the best of yourself to be able to tell people. It's not just a matter of fad, it's not a matter of, I'll do this because this is the current fashion, this is what people want to read now. I don't think it's like that. I think it's really more like do what really first interests you, so that you would be able to write it in a very interesting manner for other people who don't know anything about the subject to be interested in. Barcelona will be out in September, in time for the Manila International Book Fair, but it will also be around for the Frankfurt Book Fair. And hopefully when I'm back in the Philippines, I might have sometime in November, I might have time to do a small book launch somewhere. You know, it's a short read. It's 114 pages, filled with a lot of things. Barcelona is also a takeoff from a short story that I had written years ago, that was set during the drug war, 2016, 2017, na hindi na publish, and suddenly binalik yung Philippine Graphics Reader and lumabas doon, and nanalo siya sa Nick Joaquin writing contest. It evolved from that era, the drug war, and then we went through the pandemic, and me writing this book during the pandemic. So it also gave me a chance to reflect on what's really going on in our country. Why are we always struck with one disaster after another, and how we can move on, and writing about that in a manner that's not too nosebleed. It is just 114 pages, but I'd like to think that it had everything as well, the differences between the main islands, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. There's also feminism in it. There's also the power of women, and there's also the idea of Barcelona representing what our past was, what the past and the present, and how we have to deal with the future. To go to the website of Avenida Press, Avenida Publishing, and this is the same publisher that published Trece. I don't know if you've heard of Trece. Trece was also turned into a Netflix series. This publishing house is famous for that. It's also published books by Bob Ong. If you're in the Philippines and you want to have a copy right away, it's best to go to their website, and they will be ready definitely in time for the Manila International Book Fair. They'll be there, the artist will be there, and he's done some really great drawings of Barcelona and of that period, 2050, 30 years from now.
Don't forget to explore Criselda's books and be inspired by the transformative power of literature. Stay tuned for more engaging interviews with remarkable authors.
So I invite you to allow yourself to continue to be inspired by Barcelona and Philippine literature as a whole. The space and opportunity to hear Filipinos' perspective and voices in books and other published material is a way of understanding the global zeitgeist, especially when one realizes that Filipinos are present in every part of the world, with about 10% of our population overseas.